Yes, so we'll just start off by Lorna and I introducing ourselves. So my name is Ananya. I'm one of the final year medical students at St. George's. Last year, I intercalated in healthcare management, and my main interest is in women's health, surgery, alongside health humanities and environmental sustainability as well. I've enjoyed exploring the link between humanities and science during the Finding a Leg module. At St. George's, and it was an interdisciplinary course taught collaboratively by academics, clinicians, and artists across St. George's and Birkbeck. And through this module, we had the opportunity to explore different conceptions of the human body in health and disease and really understand why we experience life a certain way. And I think personally, it's made me connect more to the human side of medicine. And that's something we can often forget during our rigorous medicine.
Hi all, I'm Lorna. I'm sure you probably know me through the various emails you've gotten from me. And it's nice to see you all in person. I'm really glad that we actually get to come together and celebrate your achievements like this, because obviously the conference didn't go ahead, which we were all really disappointed about. But it will be happening again next year with another round of prizes being opened. But thank you all for coming is the main thing I wanted to say. And I guess I'll just I think the winners and shortlisted people have already been announced, but I'll just share them with you here. And it's really nice to see people who aren't presenting today come and just see the others present as well. But here's everyone that was shortlisted for the creative prizes, and here's everyone that won a prize, and a lot of these people will be presenting today, and I'm really excited to see what you all have to say. I think that's all from me, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the structure of today, so first of all, again, thank you for joining the session today. We have an exciting hour ahead of us, featuring all the prize winners, as Lorna has shared, for the 2022 student submissions. 4 of which were creative prizes, and the other 2 which were posters. We would really appreciate if you could try and keep your cameras on and try and engage with the other presenters. Maybe jot down some questions for the discussion afterwards, and otherwise keep yourself muted when somebody else is presenting. Each student or pair will have 5 minutes to present, and then we will follow that with a discussion within the category. So the creative prizes, 5 minutes each, and then followed by a discussion, and then the posters, undergrad, postgrad, followed by a discussion as well. So that should take us to about an hour, and then I will close the session. So I think we can get started with the first presenter, if everyone's okay to carry on. Yeah, so we'll begin the creative prizes now. So I'll just ask Yuhan to share their creative piece.
Yeah. Well, hi everyone. Very nice to see you all. So I'm just gonna drop a link in the chat. Let's see. 1 second.
So Yuhan, I'll just let you know when I'm starting the time, and I'll raise my hand
sure.
for 4 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah. So this is a video documentation of my work. And this work is called Despite Good Intentions, Raspberry. So the essential idea of this work is to mimic a non-stop feeding vitamin tablet. And I did it by using this what is called Erez, which is a little device using aquarium and fish tank to bring more air into the fish tank, to the fish, and mainly the oxygen that the fish need. So what I did was I molded and customizing Erez to appear as a enlarged and gigantic vitamin tablet that matches its proportion and everything, and with the imprint of the one of the sneezing etiquettes Gesundheit on top of it. So one thing about this Erez is that it's actually having a lot of similarities with vitamin tablets. So for example, so it kind of acts like a supplement for fish because it brings into more air and more oxygen, which acts like a nutrition for the fish, but it's actually a choice of us human. And then and the fact that if you introduce too much oxygen than what the fish needs, you probably end up with the risk of killing them. So it's also kind of similar to what vitamin tablets really are and other dietary supplements are, in fact. So as far as I read, vitamin tablets or other dietary supplements have never been scientifically proved to be beneficial to everyone. So that's something that I want to raise a question to. And I kind of want to examine what makes vitamin tablet, what makes vitamin tablets and all the other dietary supplements such a big industry, like a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then I think it is the farmer capitalism that runs behind it, that provides this kind of instrument where our unlimited desire for ultimate health meets our endless pursuit of profit. So it kind of all works out really well in that sense. And so I kind of just created this thing of a non-stop bubbling vitamin tablet by having the air stone put into a huge tank. So it's 86 by 86 centimeters. And then there's like a fiber salmon cut out of it from on the surface of it. So from the front, you get to see a glass shape with a vitamin tablet keeping bubbling inside of it. And it would just go on like that. It's kind of I kind of want to create like a ritual vibe to it, given how crazy that we can all get over buying and going after these dietary supplements, even though some of them haven't ever been proved to be beneficial at all. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, and I also added a lot of watercolor.
Okay, and that's 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Yuhan, for sharing that. I hope everybody had a chance to click on the YouTube link and watch the visual. So Yuhan's put that in the chat in case you haven't had a look at that. We'll move on to the next presenter now, Erez Solomon, with in terms of the creative writing.
Thank you, Ananya. So I'm going to read from a flash fiction creative writing piece. I'll spare an introduction, and if it's merited, it can be addressed in the question and answer period at the end. It's entitled Fever Wheels, and it begins for you Londoners with an introductory quotable from the London author of the zine Savage Messiah, Laura Grace Ford. She says, quote, "I regard my work as diaristic. The city can be read as a palimpsest of layers of erasure." I'll begin the story introducing the protagonist, the daughter, who's mid-pandemic dealing with her parents' illness. Leela, who poorly took to her parents' multiple sclerosis and disability, ever-growing depressive, rather Victorian and philosophical on matters of fate, parentage, free will, and marriage, questions whether her parents were ever, as far as she was concerned, by her definition, New Yorkers. After all, had they ever ridden the subway, never been to a Yankees game and eaten a stadium hot dog, never a glass of champagne on a New Year's Eve rooftop party, never a duck pond in Central Park? Decidedly enrolling at Vanderbilt the following fall, ostensibly, why not, Leela liked to say that she'd just major in mystical philosophy. It was 2020 after all, and she leased herself a baby blue VW Beetle and 4 years, she figured, to think about death and her life's direction. As a working premise, to ply a little affection, she also toted her impressive self-knowledge. She had her father's nice eyes, height, and strong hands, her mother's temperament, and 2 Jewish aunts in Brooklyn Heights who were always on her side. In lecture hall, a tall, unkempt sophomore's ears were suddenly awash with Leela's thick Brooklyn Upper West charm. Yo, I'm sitting with you, was all it took to fall in love. Okay? I'm Paul. I'm going to jump from this point in the story to where the environmental collapse and a bit of the fever and pandemic concerns come in. Anxiety, hug, anxiety, hug. Leela's breasts now flush and firm against Paul's back. She took him big spoon, their ribs zippering a bit, sleeping despite herself. Memories of Leela's childhood lifting her bed, wheelchairs floating, lobbies, wallpaper, Manhattan skylines, standpipes, dollar bills, Metro cards, park benches, grocery bags, and corner stores. Tall businessmen walking in Midtown, walking skywards, whirling in the air, yet to her astonishment, their feet still reaching the sidewalk. It was as if Professor Cardiff's red-bearded D.H. Lawrence meets Sigmund Freud face blew a zephyr straight at Leela. He had spent the class talking on the ephemeral research in New York City by an environmental climatologist who had warned of a doomed future. Quote, Manhattan wept, a prescient and long overdue study by a veritable genius, a Darwin of the metropolis, the island's last 500 years, species, evolution, the endangered, all heading down a precarious slope toward, quote, the extinction. Leela's parents now extinct, unspeakable. Cardiff's beseeching tirade resurrecting them. Leela, Leela, she heard her father's voice. Looking up, pausing to blink and clear her mind between Cardiff's sentences, as if Manhattan's 18th century passenger pigeons had returned from the dead in Leela's bleary-eyed vision. Now Leela was furious, uncertain, resolved, all at once. Leela had had enough. She'd just leave campus, not drop out. She caught a glance of Paul's notes. They said, quote, nature aspires to integrity, a means to the state of being perceived as a threat, an end. Soon a toothy serenity came over Leela, those squalid years with the parent chairs, as she called them. They seemed to wash away, but not die. Fatal, the Darwin of the metropolis, opening and closing subway doors, Leela's weeping in the door frame of one among thousands of subway cars, repeating the mantra, quote, a threat, an end. Picking up her own pen, Leela crossed out Paul's 310. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erez. That was a very beautiful and illustrative piece. I thought really brings us back to what actually happened during COVID and kind of personalizes these experiences. We'll move on to the next presenter now, David Warren. to share his performance moving image.
Thank you. I hope that's just loading. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my performance moving audio piece that I wrote, which was a piece of music that was written for orchestra that kind of ties in the themes of frets, futures, and fevers. So we'll listen, or I'll try to play just a couple of short excerpts, so you have a grasp of what the piece kind of was a little bit about as we go through. So just to kind of paraphrase Rolf's reflection model, why would I write this piece? What is it? And kind of what's the implications? How can we write a piece of music that represents something so broad as this? So I'm a medical student at the moment, as we mentioned, but I have a kind of background with some studies in music in the UK and the US, and I've done some volunteering and explored a bit of music therapy. So I really appreciated the chance to write something that kind of combines music and this kind of juncture between the humanities and the sciences. So what is it? Well, there's three movements. One of them is about fevers, one of them is about frets, and then one of them looks towards the future. So obviously, it being for orchestra is quite a big score, but I'll just show you little bits as we go through. So this is the beginning of the first movement, which is about fevers, and the whole thing is tied around kind of, as well as grasping a kind of image of each of those ideas. The main tunes throughout are based on the three Fs. So if you can see before, there's a kind of figure A in the top left of the music, and before that we've got these three Fs, and then they move into the bass line later on. So after figure A in the contrabass, kind of the bass line of the whole piece is based on three Fs, and there's this building, a kind of spiking through the fever movement. So it's not only a quite literal sense of these three Fs, but also kind of covers a sense of that, and that carries on as we go into the frets and the futures elements. There's still this underlying sense of anxiety and tension that I think has kind of been inevitable in the last few years that we've lived through. So what could a piece of music possibly mean? Well, I've mentioned how we can kind of represent things, but music also can be used as a tool to kind of help us. So mind might tell us that music is good for your mental health, or the NHS might guide us to say, look, find a new rhythm in your life. These are all things that can be good for us. And for many years, people have used kind of music in response maybe to plagues in the past, to the AIDS crisis, and several people have kind of responded to COVID by a musical outlet. So I'm trying to do that a little bit with this. So I wanted to write something that would be accessible to people, a bit emotive, and also to kind of demonstrate this dialogue between the humanities subjects and the sciences as well. So what's a really accessible form of music? I thought film music is probably one of the things that people maybe listen to incidentally in their life. And it's something that we can kind of all relate to, even though everyone across the globe has a different experience of the world and people have different tastes. I thought I'd go for a film music as a way of uniting us. So Hans Zimmer is probably one of the foremost film music composers, and his Interstellar soundtrack has the same sense of a slow moving bass line. These melodies that are quite straightforward, and then just inside so at the top of the score we've got that slow moving melody, and then in the middle of the line we've got this repeated movement from the left to the right of the screen, and that's something that I thought I'd try to kind of emulate in my music, and that you can see again at the bottom. So we've got these kind of broad sweeping soundscapes in the higher bits of the orchestra, these slow moving bass lines, and then a kind of incessant kind of anxious movement in the middle of it. And then finally, I just wanted to have this, or have a little bit more of the emotivity. So that previous section was from the fevers, and then here we move this kind of sense that the three different lines are kind of imitating each other. They're kind of in sync, but kind of slightly out of sync with each other. There's this dialogue, there's this bit of dissonance, and a sense of unrest that kind of pervades through the frets section of the piece. And then finally, to be emotive, something that we can relate to in the future section. Maybe as the vaccines came out, we have the sense of peace, but then there's still this underlying sense of anxiety. So I'll just play you a little bit of that last movement just to close. again, just looking at the fevers there. So here's just an excerpt. I hope this comes through on the sound of the end of the piece. So you hear a sense of the anxiety kind of clashing against a sense of resolve, which I think kind of represents the place maybe we find ourselves now. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Erez, for sharing that. I think it's really important you brought up music because I think COVID gave us a chance to connect with our hobbies, and especially, as you said, to improve mental health. I think as a whole, we had a lot of space and time to ourselves, in closed environments. So it was really important to connect with different hobbies that really support your development and mental health. And personally, I listen to Interstellar, the soundtrack, a lot while studying as well. So yeah, we'll move on to Kate Frost next for the medical student visual arts prize.
Hello. Hi, yeah, so my name's Kate, and this is the title page of a short comic that I made as part of my degree last year. So I did a intercalated BSc in Medical Humanities, Philosophy and Law, and we were asked to make a comic about the topic of death and dying. And during the time when we were given this assignment, I was going through a bit of a difficult time as my one of my closest friends was diagnosed with melanoma a couple of weeks before. And so some quite dark images came to mind quite quickly when given the topic of death and dying. But I did make the decision to base my comic around some of the experiences that I had through that. She is fine now, so I'll just say that. But yeah. Yeah, one of the main themes is basically showing the difference that I think there can be between how patients can feel about their condition and like the anxieties and fears they can have compared to the like upbeat way that their medical condition is talked about in appointments and like in the hospital setting. And so, yeah, some of the beginning is based off of actual experiences that I had, and then it's more in my imagination throughout. So this is the first page. So in the top left, you can see this is when she's diagnosed with melanoma. And this is the first time where there's sort of a difference between the way the information was presented to her and what actually happens. So she's saying, oh, they said it could be melanoma, but that it probably wouldn't be. And then you can see that she's Googling about this and is finding all of this alarming information, like is melanoma a death sentence? And then she goes into her first appointment. And you can see this like dark character in the background trying to get into the appointment, which I use throughout the comic to symbolize basically her fears about death. So yeah, they're saying that there's only a small chance that it's spread and that they can probably cure it. And her like questions about whether her being sick is a symptom is just kind of shut down by them. And then on the next page, she's sent to Maggie's, which is a cancer support centre that they have at a lot of hospitals around the UK. And so even though it's a very nice environment, it's sort of just reminding her that you can see that she's thinking, oh, the doctor said I'd be fine and that she doesn't belong here. But then she's being asked what her diagnosis is, and she's in a cancer support centre. And then in the next one, she's speaking to somebody else who has cancer, and she's saying that she was told similar positive things. And then at the bottom, it says, you might have cancer, now take your clothes off, which is obviously with melanoma, it's important that they check for other moles, but yeah, I think going to appointments for cancer is obviously already you're already in a vulnerable situation. And so just being asked to sort of take all your clothes off without any warning is a bit horrible. And then on the next page, you can see that the dark kind of death-like figure is still there, she's at work and it's still there, and she still doesn't leave her. And at the bottom, there's more reassurance that she's going to be fine because, well, people just telling her that she's going to be fine. And then on this page, this is where she's at another appointment, and you can see how the doctor is pushing the death figure out of the room, like it's not welcome in this setting. And she's given treatment, which she says, oh, is unlikely to make her hair fall out. And then on the right, you can see that her hair does fall out. And then at the bottom, you can see how it's in like the private moments when when like death is more present, and you can just see the kind of conflict in her mind between them saying that they can cure it, but then also they've said things in the past that then didn't happen the way they said it would. And then on this page, they're telling her that she's lost her hair at this point, and they're telling her that things aren't going very well, but she's reassured. She asks whether they can still cure it, and they kind of just push the question aside. And you can see that death is becoming more and more intrusive, but he's still keeping it out of the discussion. And then below, you can see some of the reasons why maybe they wouldn't be talking to her about this, and the doctor's saying that we don't want her to lose hope. But you can see that when they're no longer in the room, then her fears are just right there with her. And then the next page, there's been a kind of medical crisis, and she's asked by a doctor that she doesn't know about her end of life care plan. And yeah, and then this is the last page. So here there's a change because this is the first time that death is talked about openly. And you can see that the character looks more friendly and is just like having a tea and a biscuit. And so yeah, and so and then she says at the bottom, not holding it inside makes me feel better. I wish someone had spoken to me about it before. Would have wanted to do things differently. So yeah, it's just showing how even though she dies at the end, death isn't such a scary thing anymore, and she kind of is able to accept it because it's just she's not having to deal with it just by herself. So yeah, this is the back, and oh, actually, I have it here if you want. This is what it looks like. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing that with us. I think the topic of death and dying can actually be quite daunting to discuss, as a medical student, as a doctor, and as a patient as well. I think it's often like getting that balance between the doctor and patient's agenda, asking those important questions, but also making sure that you're focusing on communication and actually making a patient feel comfortable and realizing that it's human interaction. You're not just speaking to a number. You actually have to make sure that to address their concerns and fears and really just empathize. So I thought that was really nice. That marks the end of all the creative prizes and presenters. So what I want to do is just open the floor to questions now, and you can do that between yourselves as well. So any of the presenters, any of the council members, if you have questions, we'll just open the floor up for about 10 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? If you'd like to put them in the chat, I can help read them out as well.
I actually have a question, if it's okay to go ahead.
Definitely.
It's just for Kate. Well done, everyone who's presented so far. This is really important work what you've created, and as we know, with that arts and the medical humanities, it's so important to be incorporated, and especially the last one there, Kate, that really got me bad. I'm here bawling. But very, very, very beautiful work, and something that is truly really important. Can I just ask? You had mentioned this as a friend of yours as well. Did you find this to be a rather cathartic experience, putting this all to paper, or if anything, was it harder to go through in terms of expression? What were your experiences essentially in creating this piece?
Yeah, it was at first, I remember sitting in the lecture when we were given the assignment, and I was just like having the worst time because I was just thinking about, I was just, actually my first idea was even probably more morbid. But anyway, so yeah, at first it was really difficult. I remember saying to somebody like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this, but it's probably a really bad idea because it's going to make me feel way worse. Because it was basically like just confronting like the worst case scenario. But then I think then I just became like, the more I would think about it, I just kind of became excited and just to, I don't know, it was fun for me to do. Like there's little things in it that sort of made it seems like, I don't know, I think being able to like express how I felt once it was kind of out of my head, it just became more of like a fun project. Like,
chosen the word cathartic when I was in the throes of writing the piece, but in fact, in the long haul, kind of long arc of history, looking post-pandemic and then back to the beginning of COVID, coming to the US at least 3.5 years ago, I only really started to develop a level of empathy for some of my peers and colleagues and coworkers, whether in New York or South Florida, who were really struggling with anxiety during the pandemic, after I had written and revised the flash fiction. So ostensibly treating a character who's fictional, as medical humanities and narrative medicine would have it, then later allowed me access to real people's lives and their struggle to either make it through the pandemic with a coherent sense of mental health, or just to process the struggle over the last 3-4 years that we've all had to do wherever we are in the world. Yeah, I guess there's some spillover between reality and fiction there, in a way that I had not expected, to really draw closer to some of my colleagues and coworkers by virtue of having undergone this writing process.
Thank you, Erez. That's really interesting that creation of a fictional character actually gave you more access, as you said, to other people and their experiences. Can I just ask, what about the actual? Because I mean, there was a lot of crafting of language in your piece. Was there? How did you go about that? Was that something that comes easy to you, or was it something you had to kind of work at?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, the images, if you will, the certain kind of setting in New York and the disability motifs of MS and wheelchair users and quirky college professors interacting with more less forgiving undergraduates who are opinionated about their professors. All of that, I think, was stock material that a writer returns to time and time again. But yeah, the hard blood sport go of being a writer and revising your fiction to the point where it seems shareable, or at least presentable to a small audience or a roommate or a friend, that took multiple drafts working over post-pandemic to get to the right kind of vibe, if you will, or kind of emotional salience, where I felt that the vulnerability of the characters was where I wanted it to be, rather than kind of like throwaway, like we're all suffering from anxiety because we can't hug each other, sort of feeling that we might have been experiencing the first year of COVID. So a fair amount of emotional reverb But otherwise, yeah, it was all good fun.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have one question for you, Yuhan. I just wanted to ask about your choice of materials and color and the juxtaposition of the cup with space, and why you made certain decisions about that, and what was your inspiration?
Right. So the material, so it's mainly the airstone. I think I was kind of always attracted to the dissolving process of vitamin tablets, like since when I was a kid. I always find it a little gimmicky. It's such a gimmicky form for like a dosage, for like a medicine dosage in a way. And then I had this similar experiences looking at this airstones of in a fish tank one day, and I thought they just look surprisingly similar, and I just went off a journey to discover whether it's possible to kind of customize an airstone into this shape of a vitamin tablet. Yeah, so I think it all kind of started off from that idea of finding these two things, like completely different things, but sharing similarities in like the way they look and the way they function in a way as well. Because like I said, I find this the airstones using aquariums for the fish also act like a supplement for the fish, which I find really interesting, because it's not really a choice of the fish, but also again like a choice of the quite an anthropocentric choice, brought to the fish by us. So yeah, I just find it really interesting, and the color I think it's also like a kind of a gimmicky choice for like vitamin tablets and all the other pills. When they try to make it more appealing to the customers, they just always add sugars and the fruit flavors to it, and then to make it more like attractive. So I also added a lot of pink watercolor to make it look like a tasty raspberry flavored vitamin drink.
And you mentioned something about pharma capitalism earlier. How would you say that in conjunction with your piece links to the fevers, frets, and futures?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's actually a word or if that's just something I came up with, but I think I think it just works really well when we have so much, and when we have so much desire for ultimate health, like the magic cures for almost any disease. And at the same time, we also, as human beings, have all these unlimited and endless pursuit of the profit at the same time. And when they kind of go together, like go in line with each other, I think pharma capitalism is kind of where they meet. And that kind of just facilitates the whole process of the like commercializing all the medicines and like even dietary supplements. Yeah.
Can I just ask David quickly whether there you are. Whether there was any sort of relationship between having to work in such an abstract way with the title and the music that you explained so well, with that and thinking about being a clinical practitioner?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely. I think seeing patient experience is kind of having been, because I'd just come out of my preclinical years, so reading everything in textbooks and preclinical, you read about people spiking temperatures, you read about their symptoms, their other signs, but then actually coming onto the wards and seeing people and seeing their families for the first time as COVID restrictions in hospitals lifted, you see not only how people are feeling, but how their relationships are feeling. how everything's put under stress, and seeing staff under stress as well, I think feeds into that, because a fever may just pertain to the patient, but what it actually means, the impact of that is much wider and broader. And you can only really recognize that, I think, when you see it in context.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think, Ananya, we probably need to move on, don't we?
Yeah, I was going to say, I really liked your layering and your literal use of each word within your music. I don't know much about composing. I'm a dancer otherwise, but I really liked the different layers. So we'll move on to the next part now, which is the poster presentation. So if we can have Nerine and Vafi to present for the undergrad poster prize.
Just trying to share my screen.
Yeah, no worries.
I'll be on the wrong page.
That's it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vafi, and I'm one of the medical students at St. George's, but I'm also the chair and one of the directors of Student Med London, and I'll be presenting alongside Narine.
Hello, I'm Narine. Apologies for my voice. I'm also a medical student at George's. I've remained Vice President of Student Med London, supporting Vafi, and currently a director. As Vafi will be discussing further with you all, Student Med London is something both of us are quite passionate with. Vafi has had a strong background in public health and myself with education, so we hoped creating a balance between our teaching series, such as Learn with MedAid and Getting Donations. I'm sure Vafi would agree, and I speak on behalf of us both. We're quite grateful having our project and organisation recognised, and hope to take MedAid to even greater lengths this year.
Yes, I wanted to start off by sharing the poster you would have all seen if we had been in attendance in person. But yes, Student Med London started off as an idea since as a medical student across the UK, but specifically in London where we're based, there are very limited opportunities to get any kind of education on sustainability, global health or public health. And there are also very limited opportunity to get involved in that kind of work as a student. So we wanted to alleviate two main things. Our first main objective was essentially to increase sustainability and reduce excess medical waste by redistributing excess medical products from the Greater London area to places in the world where they were more needed. And our secondary objective was to increase the level of education on global health and sustainability, and also awareness on those issues for London medical students and also London junior doctors. And we aim to achieve that in a number of ways. We recently became incorporated and became a community interest company, which has been quite exciting because this started with a group of medical students from across different London medical schools getting together and trying to bring into fruition. And to achieve this aim, we are structured into 4 main teams. To achieve our aims of redistributing excess medical equipment, we created a resource team, which is headed up by a resource director, whose responsibilities lies within trying to create a network of potential donating organizations within London. So that's them getting in contact with GPs, hospital, medical equipment suppliers, setting up a network of volunteers, which are mostly medical students and junior doctors who are planning on doing electives or who are involved in similar global health student organizations, and then also trying to find potential receiving organizations that might benefit from such equipment. And we usually use the flipped model operations. So instead of us gathering everything under the sun and then trying to find someone who needs it, we try to find a receiving organization and ask them what their needs are, and we assess what their capacity is, because it doesn't really make sense if we get really lucky and we have a hospital donate and slightly older x-ray machine to send it to a health center in the world where they don't have enough electricity or they don't have the expertise to actually maintain that. Alongside that, we also have our communications team, who's mostly responsible for running our campaigns and our objectives in providing global health and sustainability education and embedding in that education that most students will get at London medical schools. And along that, we have a few social media series which we push, which I'll talk about briefly a little bit later. And then we have our publicity team, which supports both the communications and resource team to get the project out and organizations team. So in terms of education, we run a series of seminars and talks. Over the past year, they've been quite successful, having had talks about exploring health inequalities amongst migrant and South Asian youths and talking about the ethics behind clinical trials. And we also have a regular series on our Instagram called MedAid and Spotlight, where we pick different series each week and each month and advertise them to our following and the general public. Over the past, I'd say 2 years now, we've got a beautiful increase in terms of attendance and people actually showing up and engaging with our content. And when it comes to our talk, most of the attendees have really enjoyed them. I had an F2 who attended our Global Health Careers talk, who actually met on placement, really excited and wanted to see more content like this because she had never actually experienced while at medical schools. My 5 minutes are over, but I'm quickly going to mention some of the equipment we've gotten so far, which we've been really thankful for. And if anyone else happens to have access medical equipment or is an expert on a global health and sustainability topic and would be willing to work with us, we love for you to get in touch. And we have plans to grow bigger and better and more efficient in the future. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to talk about the work we've done so far.
Thank you so much, Vafi and Irene, for sharing that. It sounds very organized and, very topical areas. So global health and sustainable health. I think sustainability especially is something that's lacking in undergraduate or even postgrad medical curricula. And I think it's important that we get exposure to sustainable health practices so we can implement that in our future careers. Next, we're going to have Alexander Douglas to present. Are you able to share your screen, Alex?
I am. Post it quickly. All right, can everybody see that? All right, so, maybe this discussion can be just on this. If you're able to zoom in to this, that may be easier. So my background is in music and anthropology, and I am increasingly active in different parts of, I guess, a continuum that involve medical humanities, and I suppose we can say critical medical humanities. One of the projects I've been working on over the last 12 months, it's now coming to an end, which on one hand is sad, but on the other hand is great that it happened, has been my time as the anti-racism facilitator for the Society for the Social History of Medicine. Now, there is a sense in which perhaps if I offer you a framework for one example of the type of thinking I'm doing in medical humanities that's informed by other things, I take the position that diagnosis of mental health, psychopathology, if we will, is much more to do with language actions than what might prototypically be taken as behavior. And this has consequences for the specific issue of clinical judgment in psychopathology, where the cultural linguistic presuppositions of, shall we say, expert practitioners, by definition, requires to both exist and function multiple sets of conceptual presuppositions that are also metaphysical presuppositions. So now the philosopher is talking a little bit, that we tend not to interrogate. So there are some serious problems in clinical practices, in multiple domains of clinical practice, in current humanities scholarship that involves discussions about clinical practices not least with regards to notions of identity, questions of cause and effect, and more. And of course, causality, etiology in mental health couldn't be more important. So, short version, a question in recovery is that of hope. Now, how does hope actually become a viable object of medical humanities and clinical practice concern? So when I discovered, for example, that in the relatively new Oxford Handbook for Phenomenological Psychopathology, references to recovery are less than 5 and non-substantive, I suddenly worked out that there is a recovery conversation that may not be taking place, in which case, exactly what is an endgame of clinical practice if recovery is a word concept that's leveraged, but not necessarily conceptually operationalized. And so what you see here in this poster, and at some point I can put it online and share it, is the beginnings of an argument that starts with mental ill health as opposed to mental health. So there's a short discussion, but irrespective of that discussion, the issue is that why do we say mental health when in actual fact, more often we mean mental ill health or mental distress. Now, as a philosopher of language and as an anthropologist, I call this a functionally irrational use of language that certainly won't help the causes of the medical humanities. And the 4 circles, sort of concentric circle, are 4 pillars of recovery that emerged through a co-creative research project between Leeds Beckett and Ron Holloway. And so it occurred to me that safe spaces, agency, renegotiating identity and relationships, if you move to the middle column, are actually all things which don't exist without hope. And in short, I'm suggesting the beginning of an argument that hope may be experienced non-linguistically in music in ways which it can't be experienced in language, given specific capacities of language to deceive. So it's the beginning of a conversation, not the end of the conversation. And I can see that my time is up. So hopefully, not just tonight, there can be some opportunities to talk to people about hope and recovery and language. Thank you so much. Stop screen sharing now.
Thank you so much, Alexander. That was really beautiful. I think what you said about non-linguistic representation through music and hope and recovery, I think that was all kind of very important themes across COVID that hopefully we're able to carry forward, with more resilience. And just the idea of hope, I think, is very important, not just in terms of COVID, but in terms of just healthcare as a whole. So now next we'll have Alexandra to present as the highly commended undergrad poster.
Yeah, hi, sorry, hi everyone, my name is Alex and I am a year 4 medical student at King's College London. And last year I did an integrated degree in humanities, philosophy and law at Imperial College with Kate actually. And as a result of that integration, I had a dissertation which I've based my poster on, and I've put up, can you see the poster now? So this is the poster I would have presented, and it's based on my dissertation, which was titled Work, Art and Madness. So I'm just going to share my slides now. I'll be very, very quick with them. It's quite a few of them, but I'll try to run through them quite quickly. So essentially, Work, Art and Madness. We've discussed, there's been discussion about COVID and how exactly we spent our time during COVID throughout this conference, but I took a slightly different approach because I really found myself being quite overwhelmed by messages of productivity throughout COVID. My university, workplace, etc., public health services were encouraging us to stay active, to learn something new, to clean up the house, to learn a language, there were so many different types of messages about how to continue producing things throughout COVID. And I found that to be quite strange. And that was my initial inspiration for this project, because I started to link this. I saw this link between mental health and productivity as the inverse as well. What exactly happens when productivity stops? How do we see that as a society? And as I delved deeper into the historical inclinations to push productivity as a cure, essentially, I came across a very specific quote that inspired me, which was, work was not only an occupation, it must be productive. And that was a quote I came across in Michel Foucault's Madness and Civilization. And it refers to what was called the General Hospital in Paris in the 17th century, which was essentially a workhouse where all of the poor of Paris and the mad of Paris, and I used mad in this presentation, even though I am a medical student, because I wanted to encapsulate the meanings of madness that calling a mental illness wouldn't really capture. Essentially, I wanted it to be a term that perseveres across the ages, and that isn't necessarily restricted to clinical diagnosis, because there is also a really big movement right now of people who identify as mad but don't find the clinical diagnoses really fit them, or that they haven't found them helpful, or they haven't managed to get help through a clinical diagnosis. And essentially, I kept finding this throughout history, this need to make the mad be productive, to find a use for everyone. And that really tied into the concept of alienation under capitalism, not only in its initial form by Marx, but also in Ian Ferguson's Politics of the Mind, wherein essentially, even though the initial claim is that work alienates us from ourselves, when work becomes such a big part of our identity in society, being unable to produce also causes us to be alienated, both from the rest of society and to an extent from ourselves. Because if it's so inextricably linked that one must produce, one must be of use to society, this then becomes a problem when one is unable to produce for any specific reason. And one of the uses, as explored by Foucault, found for the mad throughout the ages was as spectacle. And throughout history, we see this happening. It happened in the General Hospital in Paris. They were trotted out every Sunday for the French nobility to enjoy, and most often forced to be both the performer and the person controlling the performer in alternating situations. And this type of voyeurism is something that continued. And this also led to considering outsider art, which is art created by patients in asylums starting in the early 19th century, which were then published and commodified by their psychiatrists. And through this, we see once again this need to make something useful to society overall, not necessarily a commodity in the financial sense, but something that may be consumed more widely. And this madness and this suffering made outsider art successful in the beginning. And although very far from an outsider artist, I'm sorry, I will hurry up, I know I'm out of time. The main mad artist that might come to mind, and the most famous, is Vincent van Gogh. And he's an interesting example of this type of productivity and commodification, this need for something to have a use. Because I have here, first of all, his Wheat Field with Crows, which is quite an interesting story, because it's a very widely misinterpreted work as one that forebodes his madness and his suicide, while it's actually been proven to not really be about that at all. And he became a commodity in and of himself after his death. His madness was part of his mythos, and he has gone on to become the most popular and one of the most lucrative artists in the world, with his art being consumed to an incredible extent, and as the main example of why madness is given a use through art. he is usually the example here of, oh yeah, yes, he was mad, but because he was mad, he produced such beauty, which is a notion I very much reject. So when considering how we define and view madness, I found that work is an essential tool which could cause alienation. And when this tool is displayed in the world of art as the myth of the mad artist, there are varied implications for the mad individual. There are some unforeseen advantages to being labeled as a mad artist in relation to both the work and the self. For example, art therapy is very much something that is very, very effective for a lot of people. And also, it does allow one to escape this alienation from society to an extent. However, this label remains one rooted in exploitation of the work, and the consumption of such art raises questions of voyeuristic aspects. And from a phenomenological perspective, the treatment of the mad artist can be experienced as an invasion of the subjective self, while the exposure of the mad artist's work to wider society may help enhance the audience's understanding of the artist's self. This comes at a cost to the artists themselves. I'm sorry, I'm saying self a lot. I'm very sorry about that. Phenomenology does tend to do that. But the artist loses part of their self in the process as they give it to the public in a bid to fight against the alienation. Yes, that was a very quick run through. I'm very sorry I ran over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting how you mentioned madness and the sense of productivity. I think that was really emphasized during COVID. And, when everyone was isolated in their homes, it was like, you have to get up, do something. And it wasn't okay to just be still and not be productive. So I think that was something new rather for everyone. And, that sense of alienation as well. So that marks the end of the poster prizes. So we'll just open up the floor to questions. Linda, if you want to start off with any questions for the presenters.
So I wanted to ask the first presenters about the sort of engagement, Vafi and Nareen, what the sort of engagement you got from students in the teaching series on social media. So you talked about having more hits, if you like, but I just wondered what kind of engagement you had from the learners, if you like.
I think there's a range. There are the obvious like social media metrics of having more likes on Instagram, having more comments, but it was also having that flip over to real life of people not just DMing us on social media, but us then seeing them in real life and then being really excited about the work that we're doing. As I mentioned, I bumped into an F2, I think it was a St. Heliers, who had seen our series last year, then attended our Global Health Careers event because she had gotten engaged with our social media. And she personally wants to do work in sustainability related to global health, but wasn't sure what kind of medical pathways are available. So I think it's a mix of seeing the increase in terms of our followers on social media, but also having people approach us who want to do more work that's related to sustainability in real life. And it's also getting that opportunities to present some of the work they're doing. Like some of our speakers are actually people with postgrad degrees, but also undergrads who are already doing excellent work in sustainability, and then presenting theirs. Our speakers on inequalities found by South Asians in London is actually a current student.
Okay, that was the other thing actually I was going to ask. So are the same sorts of students interested in the teaching who are also doing the voluntary work with the products, the medical products that you were talking about? Because that to me is very interesting.
I think currently we have a separate mailing list and a volunteer list, and I feel there are probably more people engaged with our teaching or raising awareness than directly with the equipment donation. We have like a core team that runs the equipment donation service, and then we send out emails to our volunteers to help us like move those around, because we can't do everything. But currently definitely are getting more engagement with the teaching and raising awareness and sustainability than their actual equipment donations. But we assume the more successful donations we start having, the more engagement we'll get from that side of things as well.
Yeah. Well, certainly I know in my own medical school at Southampton, there's a huge interest in sustainability teaching, and our students say the same thing. There's not enough of it in the medical curriculum. So thank you. Does anyone else want to ask a question before I jump in again?
Yes, actually, I had a question for Alexander, because in my psychiatry teaching this year, I came across, I spoke to a patient, essentially. I came across an organization here in London that basically uses music and I think composing, basically, to allow forensic psychiatric patients. And I was wondering if you were familiar, what you think of organizations such as this one for treatment and rehabilitation.
Thanks, Alexandra. I don't know of this organization. I have become involved in the music therapy conversation. I mean, it's not about affiliations, but perhaps it's, as in to make it clear where I sit. So I'm in a conversation about joining the board of the British Association for Music Therapy as part of broadening the conversation, interventions, and even how music itself and phenomenology is in my lane as a philosophy person. So that's very interesting. What it is that is understood to be an active agent in a framework of intervention. So I, of course, can't speak to an organization I don't know, but I think I need to be very careful, but also play it straight as quickly as I can. So I think that the claims that are made for the efficacy of music are not always in the same place of the current empirical for which we have data. And that isn't to say that music isn't super important in these kinds of ways. It is to say that, speaking for myself, I am looking forward to a time where musical interventions take place with an understanding of the phenomenon of music that I think is significantly more nuanced. So, for example, even the notions of consonance and dissonance, when in music theory we talk about the myth of consonance and dissonance, there is a hegemonic issue there with Western music, but I'm not anti-Western music. Perhaps an issue becomes that there are cultures in the world which don't even have words that can be directly translated as music. So what is it that we're talking about when we look to leverage it in the context of an intervention? But that question obviously isn't for tonight. But with a bit of luck, this organization that you've mentioned have some people who have done the conceptual homework on both the music anthropology side, as well as the, shall I say, music and clinical care setting side, and that would hopefully be very exciting.
Thank you. So I have a question for Alexandra about, so I just wondered with your kind of ideas around, this emphasis on productivity, whether you thought that this was always problematic in terms of, addressing mental ill health, for example.
I'm not sure if it's always problematic in the sense of, for example, art therapy, very effective. And overall, for some people, it can be very, very helpful to be motivated to not even be productive in the traditional sense, to go outside for a walk. But what I did find to be quite harmful, and I still find, I don't think it's subsided in our society post-COVID, is this extreme pressure on productivity of, if you're producing, then therefore you are doing well. And if you're not producing, then you must find a way to produce, and that will make you well. In the sense of, there was always this leap in logic of, not that maybe this might help, or maybe this could be something for you to do to feel more joy. It was more of, if you're managing to do something, then you're doing quite well, which I found quite strange. And it was coming from quite a few sources. It was coming, as it always does, from social media and from news articles, but it was also coming, for me, from more official sources of, oh, find a way to keep active, start exercising, do this, do that. And I just found it quite overbearing. And I do think that it's quite pervasive in our society, not just during COVID. And especially in younger generations, I do find myself feeling this type of pressure of, oh, well, what are you doing now? What are you just studying? But are you doing something else? And I feel like it's becoming quite overbearing recently because of internet culture, but that's a massive, massive issue. But I found through doing this research that historically, it's been quite a big trend in multiple countries of saying, oh, well, if you work, if you do this, if you do that, then at least, the argument was always, then at least you'll be contributing, or work as kind of moral treatment, which was something else I came across, especially for madness in the 14th and 15th century. It was, oh, it's a moral treatment. You must work. You must pay penance, for example, and then you won't be mad anymore. And I found that to be quite strange and interesting, because I thought I'd find it increasing now, but I really just think it's always existed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. And especially that link across the historical periods, as you say, even with something as modern as the internet, that the same kind of ideas are pervasive. Okay, does anyone else have any more questions or comments? As I think we're nearly at the end, I'll leave it for Ananya to wrap up.
Can I make a super quick comment on that? So, Alexandra, I think you put your finger on something really important in terms of, perhaps we can go back to Marx super quickly. Shall we call it the fetishization of productivity? And there is a discussion, which can't be unpacked, but so Marx is slightly misrepresented, that's an understatement, in secondary literature. But work, and so I work on Marx's concept of production. This is to say, in part, that in an ideal world for Marx, work is the way in which we become who we are. So when work doesn't result in us becoming who we are, that's the problem. So Marx is really concerned that we didn't become alienated by virtue of the work that we do, and really concerned with how people become the best versions of themselves. And somehow we've lost that sense in Marx, and we have, it's become easier to talk about the different bits of Marx as opposed to Marx's vision for people, as opposed to for society. So maybe Marx can actually help this conversation in some ways, even if by raising more questions, which not everybody wants to answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think that marks the end of all the presentations. I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that presented, all the prize winners, for sharing your creative and research pieces. And I hope that we've provided some additional value to your work and done justice to your submissions by discussing them through this platform. I know it was not the ideal setting, and we would have rather done this in person, but this was the best that we could do, and I hope we've achieved that. We do encourage more students and generally just more people to become involved with medical, or rather health humanities. And we would love to see your further submissions for next year's conference. So I know the conference didn't go through this year, but we've rescheduled it to July 4th to 7th in 2023. And lastly, don't hesitate to contact us and reach out if you have any questions, or if you would like to connect on anything medicine, healthcare, humanities. You can always reach Lorna and I at the student@amh.ac.uk. That's the email address with any questions or queries, as we are looking for more students to join our council at the moment in terms of the committee. So if yourself or a friend or anyone is interested, definitely do drop us an email. And, you know, it's such a great platform where you can connect with so many different types of professionals and really develop your skill set. I think we've seen from the submissions today that, you know, creativity can span in so many different disciplines, and everything adds value and, you know, helps us grow as individuals. So I think it's keeping, you know, connected to the human side of ourselves, despite going through COVID, you know, within our different professional lives. So thank you so much again for sharing. I've certainly learned a lot from all of you. And we hope to see you at our future events as well, and maybe even part of the committee.
Yes, thank you, Ananya. That's absolutely perfect.
Well done, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed.
I was just
Thank
going to
you very much for having us.
anybody does want to connect with each other, you know, feel free to drop. Yeah, I'll drop the email of the student AMH as well, so you can reach out to us with any questions.